Wonderful. It's lovely to have everyone back in, and yeah, huge thanks to King Alfred's and the Society for your hospitality. That was a lovely lunch and a really nice conversation as well. So great. So I have a real pleasure this afternoon because XP is a wonderful school based in the centre of the universe in South Yorkshire. I live in Sheffield, and these guys are from Doncaster. So we've got a South Yorkshire presentation for you to open the afternoon. One of the questions earlier was about the passage presentation example I gave from the States. And a couple of weeks ago, I had the joy of being one of the external experts. I think that might be a bit highfalutin for some of your passage presentations, which take place in Year 9 in XP. And it was a really amazing experience, partly because I saw a really diverse set of young people passing their passage presentations for quite different reasons. So a couple really stuck in my head. These are presentations that they do to show the journey they've come and that they're ready to start their kind of GCSEs. And one young man was kind of very confident, gave a really great presentation, really showcased what he'd been doing, answered some really tough questions from the panel and passed quite rightly. And then one young woman was obviously incredibly nervous, and she spoke so openly and honestly about the progress that she'd made over the last couple of years, about the kind of strengths that she'd found and the areas where she was still really struggling. She also kind of warmed and answered the questions really, really well, and she passed absolutely right. So there was a really clear rubric that they were working towards. The students had seen that. We'd all seen that as well. It was a very fair and very well thought through process, but it really showed me that it kind of brought out the best in both of those young people who kind of came at it from quite different reasons and both quite rightly kind of passed that. That's a bit of a teaser trailer. There's an awful lot to unpack at XP. It's an amazing place. You should go and visit. And I'm not just saying that because we help organise the visits, but you should. But to start us off, Gwyn, just tell us a little bit about the kind of story of how XP came to be.
Yeah, so it all started with a fire. So I was working with a friend of mine, Andy Sprakes, who was a head teacher at a school called Campsmount. And unfortunately, there was an electrical fault in the kitchen and the whole school burnt down. The aftermath of that was that we had loads of kids, no building, and we all got together as a community, and we housed the kids in across the town into different buildings. A youth centre, a couple of primary schools had some classrooms spare, a business had some offices, and it was like a real realisation of what is school, because a lot of people think that schools are like a building with teachers in it and students, but it's a community. So that was a real lesson that we learned, and then the sort of head explosion moment really was when I managed to hitch a ride over to San Diego and see an amazing school called High Tech High, who said that they did that they had design principles, and as a software designer I thought, well, that's a load of rubbish. I know what design principles are, and schools don't have design principles. And then I spent 3 days walking through the school, seeing those design principles manifest. And it bent me out of shape, really. So I couldn't really come back and do what I was doing before. I'd feel like a charlatan. So we started to try and do things in Campsmount, but it didn't have really traction there or really a mandate. It's a really good school, and we'd want to transform it into something that we didn't have a model for in the UK, and we'd have to get all the governors on board, and we needed less teachers and things like that. So Andy turned around to me one day and said, well, we can't do it here. And I said, okay, well, I'll open a free school then. And saying that as a punk from Doncaster, you know, with the policy, the free school policy, we know where that came from, and the sort of ideology behind that was a sort of an anathema to both me and Andy. And Andy nearly fell off his chair, but just before he did, he said, I'm in. And so that's what we did. Yeah, so we saw a great school, and we decided to build one from scratch, as you do. So We went back over to America and we saw some schools. There's a great network of schools, 160 schools across America, that are expeditionary learning schools. And while High Tech High is a pure project-based learning school, very hard to get through the education police here, the Ofsted. But expeditionary learning we thought was something that we could replicate, and that's what we did. We sort of mixed the design principles that we nicked off High Tech High and the expeditionary learning sort of pedagogy. We put that together so that we were Ofsted proof and we could do it in the UK. And we opened our first school in 2014, and now it's 2022, and we have 8 schools, 2 schools in Doncaster right next to each other to show how we would scale up. And we've got a new secondary school in XP Gateshead, doing really, really well. Already 6 times oversubscribed, so we're talking about parental demand. It's there. And we've been joined by 5 existing primary schools, which has been a joy to move, which is almost a hop, skip and a jump for primary schools, really, from a thematic curriculum to an expeditionary one.
So you spent that time in High Tech High and were inspired, and I've seen firsthand schools coming to XP now, all those years on, because the school that I'm an enterprise advisor at in Sheffield came to visit a couple of years ago, just before COVID, and has started to kind of develop some of that. So the story's kind of come full circle a little bit.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm quite humbled today. I've had quite a few people come and say, we've nicked this off you, we've copied this off you. I'm like, great. I don't know whether it's an English thing. Like, some people are going, we've nicked crew off you, but we're calling it something different. Don't worry. I'm like, well, why just call it crew? It's like, fine.
You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Like, expect the cease and desist in the post.
Yeah, it's like, I talk about it's like my worksheet's better than your worksheet, sort of thing.
So talking of crew, Jack, you're in year 12 now, but tell us, some people know a bit about crew, but tell us what crew means to you and how it's kind of the heart of what you do at XP.
Well, as being the heart of XP, the first day you go to XP, the first day in year 7, you get there and there's a bunch of people you don't know, 14 of them, and you have your crew leader and teacher you don't know, and you get to the school, they take a register and say, okay, we've got a bunch of buses here, hop on those, we're going to Wales. So that's the first day. Is we get there and we're going somewhere out of England to Wales, to Abu Dhabi, in order to take part in something called Outward Bound. And Outward Bound is basically just a place where you, with a group of people, with me the same age as me, in my crew, the next 14 people I'd spend my GCSE years with. We work together as a team to do loads of things, go on walks, build rafts together, jump into freezing cold English water. And that's what the first week is. We didn't do any English or maths or anything else there. The first week was just me being with my crew. So we would just be forced to work together. Otherwise, in one scenario, we would be eaten by the incoming tide if we didn't build a raft in time. So yeah.
It's a pretty strong incentive, though.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And then bringing your crew back to school, Jack. So what has it meant for you as you kind of move through the school? You see them every day, pretty much?
Yeah. So every day when you get to school, the first 45 minutes of every day in school is doing something with your crew. And crew is amazing. It's wild. It's such a fascinating phenomena, and because of what it incentivizes you to do, the people in my crew are people who I would never make friends with anywhere else. They aren't people who I would think I want to talk to them or be with them or work with them at all. But you find the kindness and compassion that they have. Some of the most XP people, the most compassionate people that I know are just ruffians, Donny ruffians, and from them being an XP and me being able to interact with them, I've just seen them as some of the most compassionate people at the best of times.
I love it. And on the flip side, when kind of things are tough, I guess there's also a role for crew there. So when I was last in the school, I got the opportunity to sit in on one of the crew sessions, and one of the young people had a period of fixed term exclusion, and she was talking, as lots of students from XP do, very honestly about that, and was saying she didn't really care what her parents thought about that. She didn't really care about kind of what her teachers thought about it, but she was really worried about coming back to crew and whether they would have her back and how they would kind of feel about her. So I guess don't feel you have to share anything kind of specific, but have there been harder times in your crew that you've kind of dealt with, as well as the kind of the outward bound stuff and that kind of thing?
Not for me, but with harder times, and it's hard for me to say. It's hard for me to talk about this because my autism makes me do weird things with emotions and empathy and whatnot. But with harder times in crew, the best thing about it is because there's so little people that I am with every single day, everyone's held to account, and that's like the most important thing in order to grow as a person, is being held accountable for your actions, what you're doing, the changes you make. And when people go through hardships, they need to be held to account. And if you don't have crew, or if you don't have something that functions as crew, I don't know how you're supposed to be held to account.
Gwyn, just zooming out in terms of like running those crews for school leaders in the audience, like how does it work? Give us the kind of 101.
Yeah, so our school's like, well, people might call it small, but I call it deliberately sized. Where each school's got 250 kids in it from year 7 to 11. We have 50 kids in a year group, 25 kids in a class, and we have 12 or 13 children in each crew to an adult. All our teachers are crew leaders, and our teaching assistants help with that as well. It's not for everyone, but it's for us. And we had a bit of a dilemma maybe the third or fourth year, where we had some really good teachers. Like, I remember we had a science teacher who was really good, but he really struggled with crew, and we wondered whether, well, we want to keep him as a science teacher, but should we let him not be a crew leader? And so great to have networks. Phoning Ron Berger up, a friend who's the Chief Academic Officer of Expeditionary Learning, and he tells us a story about a lady who runs this Texas school, which is like obviously huge, right, because it's in Texas, and she runs like 200 crews. And he said she has a saying that says, if you don't want to run crew, then you can bloom in another school. So I quite like that.
It's like the ultimate nice way to say go away.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But like basically, if you're not interested in or wanted to work at or have the ability to create great relationships with 12 or 13 kids, like, you can teach science, but can you teach science and kids? I'm not sure. Well, I am.
So crew underpins everything else, but one of the other elements, you mentioned expeditionary learning schools, so is kind of teaching through expeditions. So just unpack that a little bit for us, Gwyn.
Yeah, so a learning expedition, it's like basically it's a construction that we use to deliver our curriculum through. It's basically a narrative arc, a story which starts with a guiding question that's quite hard to answer or complex to answer. And the kids get excited. They do immersion and you know, what's all this about? We get out of the classroom into the wider world normally, and then at the end of the narrative arc, they have to produce something, have to create something, which could be something like a book or a film or a scientific paper or a work of poetry or artwork or whatever, anything. But something that has purpose, and we'd say activism, and when I don't mean like walking through the streets with placards, but like something that would change the world for the better. You know, when we measure the quality of our curriculum, we say, how are we actively contributing to building a better world? So we've got this narrative arc with kids learn stuff. So it's not pure project-based learning, but we teach kids stuff. And the product is like the tip of the iceberg. So the point is that they've got a purpose of what they're learning. Our kids never say, why am I learning this? Because normally it's to pass exams, you know. Well, where do I want an exam? Blah, blah, blah. We've all heard that before. Our kids never say that. So yeah, so it's a learning experience. Should I give an example?
I was going to ask Jack actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share a couple of your favourites, and then we can go from there?
One of my favourites, it was the first expedition I ever did, with the guiding question: what do we owe to the mining community of Doncaster? Because Doncaster is a miners' town, and what we did in there is we learnt about the miners, and we went out to see what they did, to learn about their culture, to bring in people who were ex-miners and talk to them, ask them questions, and in one instance we went on some field work, and we went to go look at some flags in a flag museum or whatever it's called.
It's the National Museum of Mining.
Yeah, that one. We went to look at flags, and so we went there with some sketchbooks and pencils to draw some flags. But on that day, it was a gathering of miners to talk about mining stuff. I can't remember.
It's Orgreave.
That
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But miners came here, and there was the community talking about that, and we were just there, and so we stayed there and listened to them talk about all the things that were going on. It was great, and there was some news agents there who went talking to people as well, and it was great. That experience was great, and at the end of the expedition, we, as a year, wrote a book.
From the ground up.
That one. It was called From the Ground Up, and it was a book filled with things about the mining community of Doncaster, biographies about people we had talked to, ex-miners, people who had experiencing with the mines of Doncaster, and we then sold that book at Waterstones in town. That's my favourite. That's great.
It's a great example,
yeah.
Jack. And you guys kind of keep Waterstones and Doncaster alive, don't you? Like the local history section is entirely full of XP books, isn't it?
So,
pretty much.
So that particular book, Waterstones told us, is the third fastest selling local history book they've ever stocked, and it was written by 11 and 12-year-olds. Yeah. It had artwork in it, it had the science about why the coal is under Doncaster. Yeah.
And that kind of idea of beautiful work, I think, runs through XP, but also runs through this kind of wider movement. So when I've been to High Tech High, I've had like 6-7-year-olds taking us round And then whereas when you go on a school tour, usually they might take you to their classroom and show you their desk. They took us to the school library, got out the book that had been published that had their names on it, told us about the academic conference they'd gone to speak to about, in that case, sea life in the Bay Area. And the same thing happens when I come to XP. Like, the students want to take me to the library, show me their portfolio, show me their beautiful work, show me what's on the wall. And it's a very different experience. But tell us a little bit about the wider product. So we've stopped the bookshop. You've got amazing films on YouTube, like the one about migration.
Yeah, so we did Should I Stay or Should I Go? So you might see that a lot of our expeditions are like named after really good punk songs. But that's a beautiful documentary by some year 9s about the migrants in Doncaster and how they got to know them through the Conversation Club, where the Conversation Club is a club, let's come and talk to people, because the migrants often sit in a room on their own with their £35 a week. And our kids talked to them, they invited them to our schools, and they played loads of silly games with them and asked them, what's the, if there was one big problem that they could solve, what would it be? And because they only get a few quid a week, they couldn't afford transport, so our kids raised money and bought bikes for, we call them push bikes up there, bicycles. For the migrants, and that was like the activism in it. But the product was this beautiful 40-minute documentary that was played at the local theatre in Doncaster, where we invited the migrants in to see. It's quite an emotional night. It's good.
And on a kind of more nerdy education side, so your students sit GCSEs. It's not kind of about no exams, but they sit a specific range of GCSEs.
Yeah.
And when you were putting together your interdisciplinary projects, you essentially sat down with the kind of curriculum for those and a pair of scissors,
right?
Cut them up, stuck them back together to make sure they still get the same knowledge and skills they need, but through a much more interesting lens. Right.
Yeah. So if there's a little trick that we use, it's really to cut down. I mean, the options, right? You can imagine that a curriculum like that covers lots of different stuff, sociology and human geography and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, we just sort of looked at the GCSEs that could fit an expeditionary learning curriculum. I mean, everyone's got to do English, everyone's got to do maths, everyone's got to do double science. You either do history or geography, right? It's because it's in the same option column. So we decided history. Why teach English without English literature? Why teach maths without statistics? So we do art, because everyone should do art. So that's what it means to be human. And then the only sort of more discrete thing is a language, and we teach Spanish. So they're the eight GCSEs. They're all actually quite easy to fit into a expeditionary curriculum. You come up with an idea and you go, oh look, if we do this, then we hit all these standards. Great, if we're looking at things that happen out in the world, I think it's been mentioned, statistics, right? So we teach our kids statistics. English language, English literature and history, teaching those together, I think makes more sense than STEM, because history just creates the like spine and the things to hang things off. If you're reading the War of the Worlds, you want to know about the xenophobia of the Victorian times, and you can piece it all together. If you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, well, learn about the triangular slave trade, and that's why in 1930s America there's racism, and that's why Tom Robinson was found guilty when he wasn't. They're the connections that you can build through that. yeah, and then so we have those 8 GCSEs, and finally you can choose whatever you want. And like for instance, Jack chose business studies and studied it pretty much from a textbook and did all right.
So let's focus in on the kind of the assessment links, just to kind of I guess bring it back to the particular topic of today. Jack, do you want to say a little bit about your Year 9 passage presentation? Does that stick in your mind?
Yeah. So a passage presentation is what you have to do to say I can do a GCSE that I want to do by myself. I can mostly self-study it. My passage presentation was about showing what I'd learned, how I'd learned it, and the pride, my ambition, and then my appreciations. I gave examples of my work, like my artwork that I loved, like some English language stories that I'd wrote that I'd loved, and my thoughts about science. My dad doesn't let it go but when one of the things that I said about physics, which is what I'm passionate about, is that being able to get 100% on a science test didn't mean that I knew physics. Being able to answer all the teacher's questions didn't mean I knew physics. Being able to tell you word for word about what was in that textbook wasn't me knowing physics, but that me being able to prove the physics book wrong was what made me know physics. And I can do that, and I will do that. And at the end, it was me going to these people that I'd asked to come into my passage presentation. The only people I had to have in there was my crew leader and my parents. But I had asked some people to come in there who had helped me through my life in XP, so I could appreciate them and tell them what they did for me. And after that, that was the passage presentation. You have to have someone else in there who you don't know as well to show to a random person about your life through education and XP, which is another great thing. But yeah, no, the passage presentation is great to be able to show what you've just going through half of your time in there in Year 9, what you've done, and how you've grown, and why you want to continue.
Yeah, and one of the other things that is kind of unusual about XP is that so every student has a portfolio in the library, don't you, that's kind of gradually built up over time?
Yeah. So it doesn't seem, you call it unusual. It doesn't feel unusual.
Of course, yeah. Normal for you, unusual for the rest of them.
Yeah. So in the library, like half of it is taken up by students' portfolios. So what we would have is every time we would do work, every time we'd complete an expedition, we would take pictures of it, and we would organize it into a folder, and so it would just be there. So whenever someone came in and said, well, what have you been doing in XP? We wouldn't, as you were saying, would just tell you about what I've done. I would go get my portfolio and I would show you what I've done, because it might be obvious, but when someone tells you something, it's very different to them just showing you it. It's when you show someone something, they can look at it, they can question it, they can clearly see what you've been doing. Other than portfolios though, like a portfolio is the school. You go into the school and you look around, and the walls are filled with pupils' work, well, like they should be, which is good. So I would go get my portfolio, I would show you that, and then I would go down the halls and I would show you my final products of the work in my portfolio.
Beautifully put, Jack. And Gwyn, again, just to kind of zoom out a little bit for school leaders in the room, tell us a little bit about how that fits together, and maybe a bit about the rubrics that you use to kind of help students know where they are and where they're on track.
Yeah, so because I guess it's unusual to teach through a narrative, an expedition, it's normally just like discrete lessons that are one after the other. We have to go do a bit more to show other people, other stakeholders, the progress against standards, against the national curriculum. So we do that really, really rigorously. So all our curriculum is mapped against national curriculum standards, and then in the portfolios, all the artifacts of learning are mapped against learning targets, which are mapped against national curriculum standards. So if you can just pick a portfolio out, and you can see the progression that our kids are making through the expeditions by just looking at the work, seeing the rubrics, so the self-assessing the rubrics, and then the teachers are acknowledging that or correcting that. So it's really straightforward to be able to see that the kids are progressing against national curriculum standards, which you don't get in pure project-based learning, but we need to do that at this moment in time in this country.
It feels to me like, having visited a lot of schools, yours and a few others, it feels like the wiring is really obvious to the students. Like when I talk to the students, you always say like, this is the rubric we're working to, this is how I get a 3, this is how I get a 4. Like, it's like you understand how the school works.
Yeah.
In a way that sometimes some of that's hidden.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great time where Ron Berger was in the school, and it might have been there was a parent, might have been a visitor, asked him to talk about the school, and Ron Berger actually got just the person who was closest to him, these ruffians that I talked about earlier, and they had the conversation with this visitor about what the school was about.
Yeah. So the question was that, like, she asked she said, "So what's your assessment policy then?" And then the kid told her what the assessment policy was. Yeah. And she was the person who asked the question was the teacher, and she went, "Thank you."
I love it. That's great. And I think a lot of it is kind of, again, thinking about the Ofsted question, a lot of it, a story I heard from when I was at School 21 actually was, they were having a inspection, and they were doing a really cool project where we brought together art and history. I think that the Ofsted inspector was wondering why they were painting mosaics in their history lesson. But then they spoke to the student, and the student told them exactly how it was and why it worked and why this project worked. And they were like, "Oh, perfect." So it's like the students got it, and that was what kind of helped there. Yeah. Final theme that I wanted to just bring us on to is just kind of thinking about how others in the room might distill some of these lessons or take them on. And as you know, Gwyn, that's passionate of mine to try and spread your brilliant work. So, Jack, after we talked about that, I'm going to come to you just to kind of ask for your final thoughts for kind of anyone who's maybe thinking of taking on some of XP's lessons. So putting that out there to give you a bit of time to think. But Gwyn, yeah, so what advice would you have for a school that's kind of open to this way of thinking and maybe just wants to take their kind of first couple of steps in this direction?
Yeah, so this is my work now. My work is to try and codify and simplify what we do in order for others to replicate what we do, because XP for us is a concept that needs to exist outside of our work, any one of us. So, the first step we did is we created a funky little book that hopefully you've picked up and not just sat on. You've probably read it by now. It doesn't take that long. Lots of pictures. But there's a nice little story at the beginning, and then there's like where we were a few years ago, and the next step is for us we're going to publish, and we'll do it with you guys, Ollie, to get this work out. There's loads of we've jumped in head first and in the deep end and done it all, and it's really hard, and it's really complex, and it's really scary, and they're the excuses that you can have not to do it. There's no other excuses. Like, I can't afford it, yeah, you can. I've got the spreadsheets. I can share those spreadsheets with you. Yeah, you get great Ofsted results. You can get great academic results, but it's hard. It's complex. It's scary. So we're trying to simplify what we do. So, for instance, you know, I've heard that some schools have implemented crew, and that's great, the pastoral side of things. Some schools have created something in year 7, or some schools are creating a school within a school, a little school that can be opt-in, that kind of thing. That's my work, is that, and you can take elements, you can take little elements and start to think, but I mean, you know, a great friend of mine, Jeff Robin, who was the art teacher at High Tech High, he unpacks pure project-based learning, but it simplifies it, and he's simplified it to one thing, which is just do something. As simple as that.
Good advice. And one of our roles is to kind of help Gwyn and the team to continue to unpack and to share this as much as possible. So I think in the schools that we've worked with, which have kind of taken on this, they've tended to succeed by either choosing crew or choosing expeditions as a starting point, with a hope of doing the whole thing eventually. And then, yeah, year 7 and 8 can be a really helpful kind of starting point, as long as the drive is there to keep going. And we were saying earlier, weren't we, Gwyn, that you often get asked about kind of, oh, when should we stop? And the answer is when the kids leave.
Yeah, I got asked last night by Dan, I think it was, when do you stop doing your expeditions? And I said, what do you mean? I said, oh, all right, yeah. So we're like, in our humanities expeditions, it's at Christmas in year 11, and then the kids do their exams. In STEAM, we sort of do. It's not a great expedition, but it's sort of learn all this and then you get your exams in year 11. But yeah, it's year 7, 8, 9 mixed performance classes. We don't set according to ability, because if you do that, you set according to social demographic. So yeah, Jack can go to whichever university in the world he wants to, and he was in the same class as kids who are going to do apprenticeships, kids who are going to do whatever. Didn't stop Jack from achieving. There's, you know, yes, even in maths.
Thank you, Gwyn. Jack, any final advice for people who are thinking about maybe doing something similar to XP?
I think it's really hard, because there are some people who can't do it, and I've met those people before, and they didn't last more than 3 weeks in XP. They didn't last with the students in XP. It was like, if you can't do it, the students really do rebel against you, and you get out. But if you want to do something like XP, if you want to augment it, if you want to recreate it, or if your ambitions align with my dad's and with XP's, you need to have integrity. I think that's the key thing, is that the success in XP comes with ambition and that strive to be successful, but with integrity and with the craftsmanship and quality that comes with it. That's the key aspect.
Yeah. So yeah, everyone should have a copy of the book on your tables, on your chairs rather. There's a film that Madeline, who's going to wave now, has done, which is called Above All Compassion, which is going to be having a red carpet premiere soon, and then will be online at the start of May. Indeed, and we've got a little booklet that goes alongside it, so people are welcome to have a screening. I think Al is planning a screening here at King Alfred's later in the year, but if you want to have one in your community, that would be fantastic. We organise visits to XP. You guys are amazing with kind of amazingly generous with expedition kind of materials and things. So yeah, you've got no excuse to not just do it, as Gwyn says. So yes, a huge thank you, Gwyn and Jack. Really helpful.
Like